the draft free-range egg marketing standards amendment England regulations 2024.
I call the Minister to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Harris. And it's Wednesday morning again, so we must be here again. It's a pleasure once again to serve with you in the chair. And I beg to move that the committee has considered draft free-range egg marketing standards amendment England regulations 2024, which were laid before the House on the 21st of November 2024. Now, this instrument has been laid to amend existing legislation governing egg marketing standards to enable free-range eggs to be marketed as such for the duration of mandatory housing measures which restrict access of laying hens to open-air runs. Currently, when free-range hens are placed under mandatory housing measures due to disease outbreaks such as avian influenza, the egg marketing regulations only allow their eggs to continue to be labelled as free-range for 16 weeks. And this is known as the 16-week derogation period. If the mandatory housing measure lasts for longer than 16 weeks, eggs from those hens have to be labelled and sold as barn eggs. The requirement for egg producers and packers to relabel free-range eggs as barn eggs once the 16-week derogation period is exceeded is difficult to implement in modern automated pack houses, adding significant logistical and packing cost to the industry. So this SI removes the 16-week derogation period so that free-range egg producers and packers can label and market the eggs as free-range for the duration of a mandatory housing measure, however long that might last. During mandatory housing measures, egg producers still have the higher operating costs of maintaining their free-range egg system, with the additional cost of having to ensure that hens are also temporarily housed indoors. Now, the normal laying period of a productive free-range laying hen in the UK is around 90 weeks. This SI will remove the derogation that will only affect a small part of a laying hen's productive life, with all the other free-range criteria still needing to be met, except access to open-air runs. In 2024, DEFRA held a joint consultation on these proposed changes together with the Scottish Government, and 70% of respondents supported the removing of the derogation. And the removal of the 16-week derogation has already come into force in Scotland. Following their own consultation exercise, the Welsh Government has also announced it will be introducing legislation to remove the derogation. In 2023, the European Union amended their egg marketing standards regulations to remove the 16-week derogation period, which through the Windsor Framework also applies to free-range eggs produced in Northern Ireland. So without this SI, the introduction of any mandatory housing measures that last longer than 16 weeks during, for example, an avian influenza outbreak would be detrimental for English free-range egg producers and result in an increase in free-range eggs being imported from the EU and Northern Ireland. And this could have a significant negative long-term impact on the English free-range egg industry. This SI restores alignment with the EU and Northern Ireland, and it will also ensure that free-range egg producers and packers are not incurring additional costs for adhering to government-imposed housing requirements. Now, outbreaks of avian influenza, unfortunately, usually occur during the winter months, as was the case in 2021-22 and 2022-23, resulting in the introduction of housing measures for poultry that in both those cases lasted longer than the 16-week labelling derogation period, for an additional 6 weeks in 2021-22 and 7 weeks in 2022-23. So it is imperative that this SI is in place for the rest of the winter period and beyond. We continue to uphold the high standards expected by UK consumers and businesses. The change contained in this statutory instrument will safeguard our very important British egg industry, and I beg to move.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft of Free-Range Egg Marketing Standards Amendment England Regulations 2024. Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mrs Harris, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. Firstly, can I thank the Minister for bringing forward these regulations to committee today. I'm very pleased to say, Mrs Harris, that we, His Majesty's most loyal opposition, are very supportive of this instrument and offer no objections. The initial consultation conducted by the previous Conservative government in January 2024 demonstrated strong support for these proposals, leading to the instrument being discussed today. Current marketing standards allow hens to be housed for 16 weeks before they are required to be relabelled as barn eggs. However, recent avian influenza outbreaks have once again necessitated the introduction of mandatory housing measures in certain areas for free-range poultry, which can sometimes exceed the 16-week limit. Consequently, producers adhering to these essential measures have been penalised through the loss of their free-range status. This is something we on the EFRA committee in the last Parliament, on which I sat, looked at extremely closely, and we fed this into government. I'm very pleased the previous government responded positively, and I'm very pleased that the new government has picked up the baton. These amendments will remove the 16-week derogation period, protecting our producers who are doing the right thing by responsibly housing their birds under the Chief Veterinary Officer's instructions during avian influenza controls. I should declare an interest, Mrs. Harris. I am a veterinary surgeon, so I have a strong personal and professional interest in this as well. This change is in the knowledge that once the restrictions are lifted, the birds will be back out and indeed free range. Furthermore, these amendments will ensure that English free-range producers maintain parity with the EU, where the 16-week time limit was removed from egg marketing standards legislation in 2023, as the Minister has articulated. This will create a level playing field for our producers and reduce the likelihood of English free-range eggs being substituted with imported eggs. Whilst we are supportive of this instrument, I do have some questions for the Minister. But before I do that, I would again like to put on my record my thoughts and sympathy for farmers and bird keepers affected by the avian influenza outbreaks. This virus is still with us, Mrs. Harris, and still there are outbreaks. I also very much pay tribute to everyone at the Animal and Plant Health Agency, vets, officials, scientists working hard on this situation, as indeed they are working on many different types of disease situations. Avian influenza is with us, blue tongue is still bubbling away, and now we have the real concern of foot and mouth disease confirmed in our near neighbour, Germany. As a veterinary surgeon, I am all too aware of the devastating impacts animal disease outbreaks can have. Avian influenza outbreaks can have impacts both obviously on birds, in terms of reared domestic birds, but also wild birds. But also, Mrs. Harris, there are significant human impacts, not least the mental health impacts of those in the front line. Given the ongoing avian influenza situation, can the Minister outline additional measures the government is taking with regard to avian influenza to preserve our nation's biosecurity? And also, can he update us what is the current policy and status in terms of vaccine development and deployment? In addition, can the Minister clarify what steps are being taken to coordinate these changes with Welsh authorities, as we know that they are bringing them forward, but to make sure that we have a consistent approach across the UK? In closing, we will be strongly supporting these crucial measures, and I'm grateful that these regulations have been brought to the committee today. Thank you, Mrs. Harris.
Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his support on this, and we're very much carrying forward the work of the previous government. He asked about the additional measures to preserve biosecurity, and he raised the very important issues around blue tongue and foot and mouth disease in Germany, and I can assure him that all the measures that he would expect to be in place are in place, and I spoke to the German Minister about foot and mouth last night, and we'll be updating he and his colleagues if there are any further developments on this. Obviously, we hope that that can be contained. And on blue tongue, we held a round table yesterday on our approach for the future. So I can assure him that we're very, very aware of these threats. I think anyone holding these offices is very aware these are of huge concern, not just the farming community, but the wider community as well. On vaccination, the vaccination of poultry and captive birds, excluding those in licensed zoos against avian influenza, is not currently permitted, as I think the honourable gentleman knows. And while authorised vaccines are available, they are unlikely to provide full protection for the current strains of highly pathogenic avian influenza circulating in the UK and Europe. So at present, while vaccination can help to reduce mortality, it's likely that some vaccinated birds would still be capable of transmitting avian influenza if they became infected. So that is not at the moment our current approach. And he asked about the situation with Wales. I think I said in my opening statement, the Welsh Government is pursuing similar lines on this. So with that, I hope that we can move to a conclusion on this, Mrs. Harris. I would just like to add that I quite understand there will be some concerns that somehow consumers are not getting quite what they seem to be getting, and we're very mindful of that. So to reduce the risk of consumers feeling misled, we will encourage retailers to place signage near where eggs are displayed, informing consumers of the imposition of mandatory housing measures and the impact this will have on the marketing of free-range eggs. Notably that the rest of the free-range egg criteria continue to be met, except for the access to open-air runs. So we think this is an important measure to support the British egg industry, making sure they have a level playing field with trading partners, such as the European Union, who have already adopted similar provisions. And on that basis, I therefore commend these regulations to the House.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft free-range egg marketing standards amendment England regulations 2024. As many of our opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Excellent.